Don't ever lose faith. All right, we are up against it for Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch. Here you go.
Right, as we've been doing throughout the pandemic, we've been trying to keep you up to date on that and everything else that's going on in your world. And today is one of those everything else that's going on in your world kind of days, although there is touching on the pandemic as well. It's a fan favorite. People harass me to get on the show more often. Since he's trapped in his home, he had no excuse to not be available. It's Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. How are you, Tom?
I think I hear the kids calling. I'll be back in an hour.
Exactly. Mine upstairs are currently screaming Frozen. Thank God for doors. Man, I don't know. It's crazy, crazy time. First of all, how are you in Judicial Watch surviving the pandemic and able to, you're still filing Freedom of Information Act requests, you're still doing your job, but how has the mission, or not the mission, but the workings of Judicial Watch changed under this lockdown?
Well, like for most other people, our job is more difficult, and it's disturbing constitutionally speaking, since we provide oversight over the government. And I think one of the dirty little secrets about this shutdown is that the government is able to do so much more with so little oversight, because those who would provide the oversight and citizens themselves can't exercise fully their right to petition the government, assemble, and things like that. So, for instance, Congress, the Senate's back in session right now. But the groups and individuals who would be in their offices communicating with the Senate and doing other things, they can't do their jobs the way they otherwise would do. And, the D.C. government has shut down the Capitol, and it's harming our constitutional protections as a result.
How do you go about your job then? Is it all just electronic filing and phone calls? How do you, because you are doing oversight, you have to find like candidates running for office who can't go out and kiss babies in anything. They're having to find new and creative ways to reach out to their audience. How's it affecting the work of oversight?
Well, we still file lawsuits. We still file FOIAs. The FBI and the State Department have stalled on the release of FOIA, saying their operations have been curtailed because of the coronavirus, which is a load of bunk in my view. They ought to be able to do the work. The courts are still operating. So hearings we've had have been in, some of them in person, actually. We were in court in California, I think in person the other day. Others have been through teleconference. So the wheels of justice continue to grind.
Unfortunately, oftentimes we're ground under them. Let's start in California, where you guys are you filed a temporary restraining order to try and enjoin Governor Newsom. He wants to give $75 million in cash benefits through gift cards and other methods to illegal aliens. This is it's a foreign concept, if you can forgive the unintentional pun, to American citizens to be giving away money at a time when we're spending trillions to people who are not in this country legally. What is the status of that case, and what are the prospects?
Well, we were in court yesterday seeking a temporary restraining order, and the judge said that we were likely to succeed on the merits. We're representing taxpayers who object to the governor spending that money on his own without legal authority. And the court said, yeah, well, you're likely to succeed on the merits, meaning, yeah, we suspect that the judge that the governor has no ability to spend this money lawfully, but it's in the public interest that these illegal aliens get this illegal cash. So she allowed it to go forward.
It's amazing how they can read the plain language of the law and say, yeah, but still,
Yeah, I mean, the law, there's an acknowledgement that the law prohibits the spending, but because it's quote an emergency, he can do it anyway. And in my view, the law shouldn't take a holiday because of a pandemic. And, if you want to know why our rights are under assault, why our freedoms are under assault, it's judicial decision making, like we saw yesterday, where the courts are failing to uphold the rule of law in the face of aggressive abuse by elected officials over the rights of American citizens. That's disturbing.
Now, where does that case go next? You just work it up the food chain, but the money could be gone by then.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to appeal it immediately to see if we can stop it, but we'll see. It's California, so it's always a kind of a uphill battle. But The rule of law deserves to be vindicated, places like California, especially where it's under attack.
We see that everywhere in this country. We have governors declaring emergencies, and we've never had an emergency like this. So it seems that they're testing the limits of how far they can stretch their authority, spending money, criminalizing things without legislature criminalizing something. That's where the laws are supposed to come from. What, as you look out over the 50 states, what do you see as some of the most egregious abuses of power by these governors in time of emergency?
My understanding of the law, I'm not a lawyer, but, I've kind of been looking at this pretty carefully, is that if you need to be quarantined, Derek, let's say you're sick, and there's a police power, in theory, that allows the government to say, you got to stay in your house, you can't go anywhere until you feel better, or there's some reasonable assurance that you're not contagious. Yeah, but that's a limited, time-limited, discriminate, meaning it's directed only at you, quarantine. I mean, the idea that our constitutional system, common law, whatever you want to call it, allows governors to indiscriminately tell everyone to stay at home, close all businesses for an indefinite period of time, it's not lawful. It's to describe it is to kind of highlight its craziness in terms of the rule of law. To tell the sick and not sick they can't go out, to tell all businesses they can't operate no matter what they might do to accommodate reasonable health and safety standards. It's just it's not something that is based on law. It's based on panic decision making by governors. I understand why it happened initially. There's no more excuse now. There's no science behind it. There never really was any science behind it. It was a national experiment on Americans, and the consequences are as dire as anything we're facing from the coronavirus pandemic. Certainly, health is being destroyed, jobs are being destroyed, our lives are being torn asunder, our national fabric is being rent. It's terrible.
We had Shelley Luther down in Texas sentenced to 7 days in prison and a $7,000 fine for daring to open her perfectly legal business and cut hair.
And the governor and attorney general object to what the judge did. I don't know if she's going to go to jail or not, but maybe the governor can. I don't know if he can technically pardon her to prevent her from going to jail. But that business legally can operate on Friday, and the judge put her in jail today or yesterday. Incredible.
And for 7 days, and fined her $7,000 when she said she opened it because she was afraid of not being able to pay her mortgage, which you would think you would at least have some understanding with. And up in Wisconsin, we have a governor who assigned the health minister, whatever the official title is, the authority to create penalties for breaking the law that she also was given the authority to declare to be a law. It is. I know you guys focus mainly on the federal government, but you also focus on states as well. How do we pull up out of this? Is there a way to get back to normal after this? Is there a way to regain trust in government when the government declared you under house arrest and a criminal if you leave your house? You get the sentence, and if you leave the house, you commit the crime.
Well, the voters and citizens are demonstrating and voicing their displeasure. I mean, the constitutional issues are significant. The freedom issues are significant. One issue that I think is pressing that I don't think enough politicians are talking about is the fact that 30 million people are out of work. And there's no urgency here in Washington or in any of the states I shouldn't say in any of the states, but in too many of the states to get them back to work. I mean, the consequences of this destruction of our economy doesn't seem to matter to these government officials. And why is that? Because most of these government officials get paid no matter what happens. They'll probably have a job no matter what happens. Even if they lose, they'll have a job. And certainly here in Washington, D.C., I don't hear any sense of urgency. Even, the White House is, frankly, if the president weren't president, I think we'd all still be in shutdown right now. Because it's his skepticism and him pushing back against this that has gotten us the governors to do what they've done thus far. Now, the governors are kind of accelerating it, some of them. But, as long as you got major swaths of the country still shut down, like New York and New Jersey, I mean, we may say, well, those are blue states. Well, they're American states, and they're key to our economy just the way other big states are. And we can't have New York and California shut down. If I were the president, I'd intervene and yank the yoke of oppression off the citizens of California, New York, and elsewhere. Let them get back to work and give them their lives and freedom back.
That would be great, but just as the president says, he doesn't have. Well, is the Justice Department someplace you guys, obviously file Freedom of Information Act requests against a lot? I imagine you know a lot of people in the Justice Department in the permanent class. They probably hate you, but is there any move? The Justice Department, I know the Attorney General has said that he's watching these lockdown orders, but is there anything that they could do? I mean, ultimately, we do have a federalist system where the states do have a lot of leeway.
They don't have leeway to override the Constitution, though. Our First Amendment rights, our rights to property, as the Attorney General has pointed out, to interfere with commerce as they're doing is also suspect. I think the Attorney General, the Justice Department, has filed a few pleadings here and there on religious freedom cases, which are, generally speaking, slam dunk type of issues. My concern is there continues to be a gap between the Attorney General's rhetoric and DOJ action in this area.
Why do you think that is?
For the reasons you suggested, the permanent bureaucracy at DOJ has zero interest in getting in the way of the government class that is asserting its authority, that they may pull back a little bit or pull back to let us get back to work eventually, but will never be pulled back sufficiently in terms of the new ground they've set as to where government can go to tell you what to do and how to do it.
Ultimately, Congress is supposed to do oversight of the executive branch, and they seem to have interest in certain things and not other things. Taking this back to the impeachment, and we still don't have all of the testimonies that Congressman Schiff received in the intelligence community, do we?
Yeah, that's an interesting story. So these Nunes and company, they did a thorough investigation. They deposed, I think, over 50 witnesses. And so what Congress is, they send this over to the executive branch to declassify the deposition transcripts. And much of that has been declassified for over a year now. And Congress or the committee has voted unanimously to turn the material over to the public, but it hasn't been done yet. So Rick Grenell, who is the former ambassador to Germany, now the acting head of the Office of Director of National Intelligence, he's the DNI, he sent a letter to Schiff essentially saying, here are these transcripts. They're all for the public to see now. And if you don't release them, we will.
Why hasn't Schiff, do you suppose?
Because they document the Spygate abuses of the Obama Schiff gang and the harassment and the coup attack on President Trump. So they don't want any information about that coming out.
Are we going to see that? How long of a timeline did Ambassador Grenell give to Schiff?
Oh, I didn't know what the
timeline
was, but I think it's going to be in the next few weeks. That's for sure.
How much of this do we still not know? Is that even a knowable question?
We don't know what the DOJ was doing still. We don't have any testimony from them, more or less. There's a little bit in the IG report. We don't know a lot.
What is
all of this spying going? We don't know how many FISA warrants there were. Who else was targeted?
No.
What about the unmaskings? We don't know about the unmaskings. There's still a lot of information there. They're still withholding 8,000 emails from Judicial Watch between Page and Strzok, refusing to turn over any text messages. There's a lot we don't know, Derek. It's terrible.
Are they giving a reason for these things? It can't be national security purposes.
Oh no, it's just they just say it's taking time to release the records, and we'll look at them at a rate of 500 pages a month. So at the rate they're looking at, which of course has stopped completely because of the coronavirus excuse, we won't get these emails until at least the end of next year in toto. And that's, again, only the emails they give us. It's not talking about the emails they've already withheld. So that's when the fighting begins about what they withheld. And they're also taking the position legally that text messages between Page and Strzok and text messages sent out by Andrew McCabe, the corrupt deputy director of the FBI who was fired, all of those are not subject to FOIA. So we can't get them in theory at all from them, according to their legal briefs.
The President of the United States has absolute authority to classify or declassify things. Could he not wave his magic pen and say, release these now?
Yes.
Why do you think there's a reluctance there?
That's what he should do.
Why do you think there's a reluctance?
My guess is the Justice Department and the FBI and the State Department, they all presume to be, quote, independent of the president. And they don't like the president, and they tell the president, oh, don't do this because you'll get people nervous and upset. And my view is the president has got to step in. In terms of the major accountability efforts, it's only happened with the president stepping in personally and directly to get things done, whether it be firing Comey, hiring Barr, and taking these other proactive measures to make sure that there's at least some accountability, and there's more to be done. Look, anytime he makes any, he exercises authority lawfully and correctly in the Ukraine Biden scandal, and he was impeached for it. So you can just imagine what he's being told if he wants to do anything else like that.
Now, obviously, the Freedom of Information Act is a great tool, and it's a powerful tool if it's acted upon by government officials that are supposed to act upon it. They often don't. They drag their feet, as you've laid out. There's no such tool for the American people to get the inner workings of Congress, is there? The Freedom of Information Act does not apply to Congress. You can't find out if Adam Schiff was coordinating, just hypothetically, was coordinating with some outside group or anything like that. You have no access, no legal standing to access their records.
Yes and no. The Freedom of Information Act does not apply to Congress. But we, for instance, just sued Adam Schiff and the House Intelligence Committee to get access to his illicit secret subpoenas of the president's lawyers' phone records that he later abusively published. Using a common law right of access theory under the law, meaning that, these are government records and we have a general right to access here in the District of Columbia, and they're not protected by the speech or debate clause because it was an impeachment effort. And so it was a separate issue that doesn't keep the records privileged. And of course, Schiff came back saying he has a sovereign immunity, the Congress has sovereign immunity, he has all these privileges, and we can't get any of the records. So Schiff's current position is he should be able to subpoena and take the phone records of any American in the world, any American, and then publish them with no accountability to the law. Now, if a cop took your phone records without a subpoena or a subpoena approved by a court, they'd be facing some jail time. But Schiff thinks that he's above the law, and so does Pelosi. And Pelosi's now spending your tax dollars. You want to know what we were doing that were in the coronavirus fight? During coronavirus, we're having to respond to objections from House lawyers to our lawsuit. So when you say Pelosi says, we're not coming back to work. Oh no, they're working. They're working to stop Judicial Watch from getting answers about Schiff's abuse of power in his impeachment attack on President Trump.
Well, Nancy can sit back and direct that one from in front of her $24,000 fridge. Right. Yeah, in front of her massive fridge that is smaller than most New York City apartments. Also, you brought up again, and we're going back to the coronavirus. You guys are trying to get communications between Dr. Fauci and the World Health Organization. What are you looking for? What are you asking for there? What are you looking for there?
Well, we're representing your colleagues at the Daily Caller News Foundation, who had asked for communications between Fauci and WHO during the coronavirus period, and other documents within the NIH about coronavirus and the specific communications. What did WHO tell Fauci and his colleagues about the coronavirus? And were they acting as cutouts for China, as everyone has concluded? So it's a pretty simple request. the fact we haven't gotten any answers, or the Daily Caller News Foundation hasn't gotten any answers, suggests they may not want the answers to be public.
What's the hardest bit of what's the hardest department to try and get to comply with the Freedom of Information Act request?
Oh, they're all difficult now.
Really? Even with a Republican president?
I mean, it used to be some departments were better than others, but now it's the Clinton email case ruined it. She ruined FOIA.
How so?
Because the agencies just took under Obama, the agencies started taking this hardcore position because they wanted to all protect Clinton. So they all got very aggressive in terms of refusing to turn over documents and then fighting you once you're in court for every inch of ground in terms of transparency. I joke. I said we have to sue. We have to sue to get the time of day these days.
You guys are out there. Congress has the ability to do this as well, and a bigger hammer than the Freedom of Information Act request. You can't expect the House of Representatives to get anything particularly interesting that might that isn't have the partisan slant. But the Senate doesn't seem. You hear saber rattling from Lindsey Graham every once in a while. I'm going to hold a hearing on this. I'm thinking about this, that, or the other thing. Is the Senate doing enough to hold the sort of deep state accountable in your mind?
No, it's not. And what's happening in the Senate is that Graham has talked about doing hearings and bringing in witnesses, and there's always a reason why he doesn't do it every time he's asked about it. But the real reason is there's this kind of rule in the Senate that they need the agreement, effectively speaking. It's not technical because they run the Senate, the majority does in the end. But practically speaking, they need the minority in order to issue any subpoenas, and they don't want to fight with them about it, so they don't do it.
So it's just the Senate is kind of a go along to get along kind of body, and that's
it's sending letters and hoping people respond. And look, the difference between FOIA and the congressional oversight process is that FOIA, you're in court, and there's accountability for the process. The government has to come in. They have to say there are documents, there aren't documents, and explain why they're not turning them over. The debate between oversight in the political branches is very different, just because it's politics in a more traditional sense. So whether they get documents or not, it's a political question. And so as a result, you sometimes don't get documents in Congress that you're able to get through FOIA. I mean, sometimes it's the exact opposite, but because sometimes Congress gets documents we never find out about because Congress doesn't release everything it gets.
Do we need a FOIA sort of process, or probably more tailored in the sense they'd have to write it more narrowly focused? But is there a possibility of getting Congress to say, all right, we have to open our books, the Open the Books Act will give you access to non-classified information that we get. If it's ours, it's yours sort of thing. Do you think there's any appetite for that up on the Hill? Seems like that could benefit and hurt both parties.
Yeah, I mean, it's the only reason it might go forward because both sides have something to lose or gain from it. On the other hand, it certainly makes it more difficult. I've long suggested, I've testified to Congress a few times that Congress should subject itself to transparency laws, and they don't. The federal judiciary is also exempt from transparency laws, which is also inappropriate. And I think you can have a transparency law that allows respects the privileges of the judiciary and the Congress under our constitutional system, but also provides more accountability. I mean, for instance, the personnel records, the administrative records related to the slush fund sexual harassment issue, and specifically, I'm thinking of Joe Biden. There's no reason that type of material couldn't be subject to FOIA.
It really is shocking that most people don't know that the Senate records of a United States senator, his speeches, his notes, who he met with, are locked in a public university, and he set the terms. He got to dictate the terms under which they could ever be released to the public.
Yeah, and that's not unusual.
I know that when I left the Senate in 2006, Conrad Burns, he purchased his servers. I had never heard that before, but he purchased his Senate servers legally. And that meant that he had control over all of the electronic communications in the office. offices. Now, theoretically, if Strzok and Page's texts to each other, because they were on their government-issued phones, are public information, why should not an elected official have their electronic communications subject to the same thing?
Well, the only technical issue is the speech or debate clause, but that's a privilege that they can exempt records from disclosure under. It doesn't mean that other records, related to the administration of the offices, and like the office of the architect. They spend a boatload of money. Why can't we get FOIA to them? It's not speech or debate. What about the Capitol Hill police? They're not subject to FOIA.
Are you finding, because you guys, the Obama administration, you guys did most of the journalism that took place from a critical point of view during the Obama administration. You discovered the Hillary Clinton's secret server, things like that, things that normally would have been done, but just weren't. Was there a lack of FOIA requests filed by journalists during the Obama administration, and has that returned in the Trump administration, or are they still just kind of relying on you guys to discover everything and then they'll just sort of steal it with credit?
No, I mean, journalists are always doing FOIA, but their interests are different than ours. They're liberal activists, and so they're looking at particular issues that pursue or advance their narrative. As conservatives, we're skeptical of government. We think a lot of it is corrupt. So we have a different approach. But in my view, a lot of the legacy media enterprises can't fairly be described as journalistic in any serious way anymore. In my view, they're advocacy groups that sometimes do journalism, but they're advocacy groups. And so, in terms of, and I will insist that Judicial Watch's journalism in the areas that we look at is more significant, more substantial, more reliable than anything being produced these days by legacy media.
Well, you guys don't do any of your journalism based on anonymous sources, right?
No, yeah, we sometimes get sources and leads like anyone else, but when we do FOIA documents, it's a straightforward. These are the documents. I mean, we don't say, oh, there's this. Someone read me this document and here's what it says, even though I haven't seen it. We prefer to get the documents. And obviously we don't break the law like journalists regularly do, in my view, in publishing classified information knowingly, conspiring with others to get it published to target people you don't like, which is what they did multiple times with President Trump and are still doing to this day.
Talk about Michael Flynn for just for a few minutes as we wrap it up here. It just every day there seems to be some new revelation that he has been targeted and railroaded and exculpatory evidence withheld. What's the goal here? To try and get him fired, to try and get him to lie? What is it? People were horrified, rightly so, when that was discovered, but is that really all that uncommon?
Well, it's not as uncommon as it ought to be. It's really uncommon when it comes to targeting an official in the White House or a candidate for president or a president of the United States. These weren't mafia figures. These weren't terrorists. This was their political opposition, the Obama gang's political opposition. And they broke the law and they broke the rules to bring it down. And I don't know why General Flynn is still facing charges from the Justice Department. I don't know what's happening there. There's been this big gap between what we hear from the Justice Department leadership and what actually gets done. And I'm not seeing much get done in the way of accountability here. I mean, Justice Department should pull back the charges. And if they don't within a time certain, if I were president, I would direct the Justice Department to drop the charges.
Is it a political decision at this point? Is that they're continuing to be, that Barr is continuing to be hands off, or is it sort of a race against time with the Durham investigation? And maybe I don't understand the politics of it either, but I know that if the president directed the Justice Department to drop charges against General Flynn, that would be an enormous scandal, even though it would be perfectly within his rights and power to do so.
Well, the Justice Department sees itself as independent, which is constitutionally an abomination of an idea. And someone needs to remind them that they answer to the Constitution and the President of the United States, who was put into office to run and enforce our laws. And in my view, when a president sees misconduct and abuse of power and illegal acts by Justice Department, he should step in if the Justice Department isn't doing the steps necessary to clean itself up. And I don't see that either the FBI or Justice Department are cleaning itself up. I just see investigations that go on, world without end, and no accountability, no prosecutions of any misconduct.
Well, that's cheery. That's such.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are all these, like we've been told, the grand juries and secret testimonies. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. And these are one of these cases where I hope my skepticism is proven to be completely wrong, and that everything comes out right in the end. But in my experience, past behavior is a good indication of future behavior in politics.
Does the government have a problem investigating itself? Because I get emails all the time from listeners talking about what's going on with Durham. Why is this taking so long? What's happening? I know the problems you guys have, the resistance of the bureaucrats to want to comply with any FOIA request, but it would seem like internally they should have access to everything. But is there resistance within the government to the government?
Well, the government doesn't have any problem investigating itself. If you're on the wrong end of it, they'll investigate you too and drive you from office like they did General Flynn. Look what they did to President Trump. Completely unconstitutional investigation. There's no problem investigating itself. These are folks who are protected within the agencies from serious accountability. And it's because politically, as you keep on highlighting that word, and it's a good word to focus on, there are political decisions made. But if the government wants to do it, they can do whatever they want. The Justice Department can send over U.S. Marshals to the FBI and take all their servers to make sure all the documents have been turned over. There's no legal prohibition on that. And politically, it's difficult to do, but that's just fear-based decision making. That's not law and order.
So should people have faith that there will be accountability in their government in the case of the Russia spying?
Well, we get accountability through disclosing what went on, so there's kind of a rough justice as a result. But in terms of people getting prosecuted, I suspect maybe a few people will be prosecuted who they can't avoid, like that FBI official who supposedly changed a document to make Carter Page from an FBI, a CIA asset and patriot to a enemy of the state. And maybe he gets prosecuted or pled out, but even then, I suspect it will be a slap on the wrist. I'm not seeing any evidence, though, Derek, that the senior levels of the agencies are being investigated criminally in a way that suggests that they'll be prosecuted. But maybe it's all being done in secret, and I'm naive. But look, when there's a serious criminal investigation, there are grand juries, there are people testifying, there are lawyers yelling about it, especially grand jury investigations targeting a serious political figure or former government officials. They can't keep that secret. And we're expected to believe it's all being kept secret now. And I don't buy it.
Neither do I, sadly.
That's why we have Judicial Watch. I mean, we just keep on doing the work because we just don't believe the government's going to do it unless it's pushed or if we want accountability, we just have to do it the way we're doing it, which is through independent oversight.
Well, I'm glad that Judicial Watch. You guys are 25 years old this year? Is that really the number?
Yeah.
Good Lord. How long have you been there?
I've been there since 1998, so 22 years or so.
What was the first thing you remember working on? 1998 was right.
It was an FBI scandal. It was like we came in and we were pursuing the Clinton gang taking the FBI files of Republicans over to the White House, and we had litigation over that.
Well, yeah, that's the blackmail material.
Yeah, so nothing's changed in that regard, right? I mean, it's the same old, same old.
Well, you don't actually hear about abuses of that nature by the Trump administration, though. Maybe it's because they don't know they can get away with it. I don't know, but you haven't heard those types of scandals. You hear allegations of incompetence, but you don't really hear allegations of, except for vague ones about this ambassador stayed at his hotel. You don't hear the abuses of power against political enemies that you've heard about from the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, obviously.
Yeah, usually the president is out there victimizing people like Obama did with the IRS and targeting Trump. In the case of President Trump, he's the crime victim. He's the one being targeted for abuse.
He's the enemy of the deep state,
That's for
if
sure.
you will. They like their gravy train rolling. They want it. Tom Fitton, judicialwatch.org. Anything we should look forward to in the coming weeks coming out? You just want to hint around? I know you're not going to tell me, but anything you want to hint about? Maybe watch next week because X, Y, or Z?
We're still fighting for Hillary Clinton's deposition. A court ordered that she be deposed on her emails, and she filed a desperate appeal that we think isn't going to go anywhere. At least we hope it isn't. So she could be getting deposed over the next month or two if the courts, and it's a big if the courts follow the facts and the laws we suggest that they should.
Do you really think she seems to have selective Alzheimer's when it comes to anything that she's directly has her fingerprints on? She can't remember, which is the lawyer's defense. When a lawyer testifies, if you can't remember or if you don't want to remember, just say you can't recall. She's very good at that.
Well, it's easier to put that face on when you're writing answers to questions, which is why the court says that we get to question her in person.
So how long till we find out on that, do you think?
I don't know, but it was an emergency petition by her, so emergencies presumably are handled more timely than non-emergencies. So we expect over the next month or two to hear something.
Would that be videotaped if it happens?
I don't know.
Would you be in the room if that happens?
Maybe.
There you go. Tweet the whole damn thing out. Tom Fitton, judicialwatch.org. You're doing the Lord's work, and thanks for taking some time for us today.
You're welcome, Derek. Thanks for the coverage.